Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Duwancho NX Natural Processed Ethiopia from Coffea Circulor. And there's the bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Arendal, Norway. And as mentioned in our previous review, the roaster we're going to be featuring a lot this month, as they released a number of coffees that did catch my interest, including this one right here. Now, one of the most common questions I get asked is, what's a coffee roaster that releases more clean and vibrant natural processed Ethiopian coffees? And Coffea Circulor is a coffee roaster that I would put near or at the top of that list, as I do have a pretty good track record with their natural processed Ethiopians. So when I was looking through Coffea Circulor's current offerings, this one did catch my interest as it was a brand new release on their website at the time of purchase. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one did turn out, as this right here is day 39. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Coffea Circulor's recipe, which is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this one, as I say, sometimes it can be a little bit more tricky to tell when it comes to natural processed coffees. This one is a little bit of an exception as well, as you could definitely tell that this one is on the lighter side of the spectrum, as even with the processing, this one did come out as a very light coffee. Very much in line with that term, Nordic light yet again, so I would consider this to be on the very light side of things by most standards and metrics. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we opted for the V60 with this one, and there was an abundance of fruits within the first sip, as it was mostly a sweeter citric component, but in addition to that, there was a lingering stone fruit, and I'm going to be completely honest, I was kind of taken by surprise with that stone fruit aspect, as the nectarine note they had listed on here was quite pronounced. In addition to that, there was a slight bit of some complementary red fruits, but overall, was a cleaner than average natural processed Ethiopian coffee, so in general, a pretty nice start. Day 17, ran it through the Chemex, and the grinds themselves did have a noticeably more wild aroma than the cup, as it came out a little bit more mild in the cup itself, at least relative to the very strong aroma that was present from the grounds, as there was a lingering natural characteristic to it, and a lot of that could have been that there are a lot of red notes listed on here, and oftentimes that can be kind of tricky when associating or disassociating between the two. A slightly darker herbal florality was also present in otherwise more tropical forward cup, with plenty of citrus as well as the red berry brightness, giving the cup a little bit more depth in general. At least with this brew method, I was getting a little bit more of those red fruit components. Day 20 opted for the April brewer, and the cup is slightly less clear and a bit more fermenty through this brew method, as the fruits continue to remain on the slightly more clean side of things, with a focus on the citric sweetness as well as an abundance of those stone fruits. But I feel like where I was getting a little tripped up was the red fruit aspects that were present within it, as those came out a slight bit more fermenty, a slight bit more natural-like in general, and that did kind of play against the sweeter citrus and more clean stone fruits. Day 27, back through the Chemex with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and honestly, it was the best it had been to this point, as it continues to remain on the more clean side of natural processed coffees, with a bit more of a focus on the fresh fruit. So I feel like time did this coffee some really nice justice, as it was offering a lot of those stone fruits, peachiness, as well as the listed nectarine. I could say either or, as it was a much more sweet, kind of clean stone fruit, fresh fruit aspect to it. A slight bit more focused on the red fruits as well, giving off a more tropical aspect to it, as well as the sweeter stone fruits as mentioned, but just in general, a very fruit-forward cup of coffee. Day 30 through the V60, and this is the best the coffee had been to this point, as this is the first time I could say it reached a level 4 in terms of the clarity, as the red fruit aspects were perhaps holding this coffee back ever so slightly. As I kind of mentioned, those were the only things that felt a little bit fermenty, a little bit ever so slightly funky within this coffee. But it does continue to offer a lot of that tropical citric brightness, as well as a long-lasting component to it that was in line with what I would describe as a strong caramelized fruit nectar, as it did have some great candied sweetness to this cup in general. Day 32 through the V60, and this is the best and cleanest it's been up to this point, and I feel like this is where it really finally starts to hit that level 4 mark, as it was a very well-defined red fruit aspect at the forefront, so a lot of those maybe slightly more heavier things were really beginning to dissipate and die down within this coffee, as it was offering a much more sweet, tropical, citric forward cup of coffee, very much in line with the listed pineapple. It also had great definition in that sense, as well as the entire cup felt like a strong tropical fruit salad in a much more fresh fruit, clean fruit sort of manner. Very high on the sugary stone fruits, as well as it's offering this great tropical brightness. Best day of the cup so far, a very enjoyable day, one of my favorite days I've had from any natural processed Ethiopian coffee this year. Day 34, back through the V60, and it's been consistent up to this point, as I could definitely justify the level 4 for clarity on this day, as well as the red fruits remain the most prominent thing. There's an intermediary citrus as well, with the listed pineapple present before it does cool off into the fresh stone fruit aspect. And what was really nice about this coffee was you were getting it layered, and it was very well layered and very well structured. And when you do reach that stone fruit part of this coffee, it's wonderful. A lot of people know that I really love the peachy aspects of coffees, and this one right here had a fair bit of the peachiness to it. Nectarine listed on here, yes, again, I could kind of see that, but it was a very ripe stone fruit to it, so it offered that great, tremendous sweetness to it. In addition to that, there's plenty of fruit brightness with an abundance of this candied, sugary, sweet fruit aspect as well. Day 36 kind of ran out of space, so very quick notes on this one, as it's another nice cup of this coffee. It settled pretty well with a little bit more of a focus on the listed nectarine, so that's going to be a nice little selling point to me on this coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a lot of level 4s. So let's go through them real quick, and we'll actually start with the finish, level 4. Yes, this one had a very nice even finish to it, and I do think that it helped that this one finished in a very sort of clean sense, as it finished in the more, I would say, softer fruits, even if they were a much more vibrant and pronounced component to it. So having that finish be very even relative to maybe some slightly heavier fruits at the start, that works out very well for this one. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, there is no part of this coffee that was never going to reach that level 4 mark, as the fruit sweetness is present in a lot of directions. There's a citric fruit sweetness, there's a stone fruit sweetness, there's also that mentioned berry fruit sweetness. It's something that I've maybe kind of undersold, underplayed, mostly because that was my least favorite part of this coffee. But you got all three of those things, and they were all candied at the times too, which is why we're going to mention the caramel a little later. But you're getting a lot of different sweet components. This one, honestly, on the higher side of level 4, but in a very nice sense. Then we have all three of the fruit components listed there at that level 4. We'll start with the berry fruit. I would say at times this was the most defining factor of this coffee, and when it wasn't necessarily my favorite, as I like red fruits, but I don't necessarily love them when they're in coffee, especially if they're a little bit more heavy. But given that this one had great definition and really nice clarity relative to what it was, I do have to say that having those berries score on that level 4 mark was a little bit better. I think that they might have something like currant or raspberry listed on here. Don't exactly remember, but there are plenty of those, I would say, much more clean, slightly tart red berries present within this one. And that went in line with the citrus, which, as I kind of mentioned, was a much more sweet citric component as opposed to a bitter citric component. So that being the pineapple that's on here, yes, that's much more reminiscent of my experience within this one. But the stone fruit was the real standout for me. And even though it's one of those things where it's most pronounced kind of in the finish, kind of after all of the other things that's present within this one, once you do reach that peachiness, it feels like a little bit of a reward, as you're like, these are some really nice fruit components, but this peachiness is kind of the cherry on top that makes this coffee really kind of round out nicely. And then we have a couple of level 3s. We'll start with the acidity level 3. That's interesting to me. Even with a lot of the things that I mentioned, it's not necessarily the brightest coffee in general, as it does offer a slight bit of brightness, but I might have expected a slight bit more given the roast profile of this one, as well as the citric brightness that we were experiencing from it. But level 3, maybe on the slightly higher side of the level 3. Florality also present. It is an Ethiopian coffee, so you can expect a slight bit of floral components to it. I would say it was a little bit more even of an herbal, and I think that since we had a red fruit components to it and it was a little bit of a red themed cup, you could see some of the, we'll say, hibiscus-like aspects within this one. And then we have the caramel level 3, yes, and oftentimes I love to associate a candied aspect to that caramel part of this tasting wheel, and this one had this kind of great caramelized sweetness to the coffees, I would say there's that kind of caramelized candied sweetness to the fruit aspects of this, which is another nice little added bonus to this coffee. And then I think final thing worth discussing is the body at a level 2, as this one also had a lower body. I made these tasting wheels, I want to say on the same day. If not, then they were one day apart from each other. So I had a pretty good idea of all of the Coffea Circulor coffees that we're going to be discussing, how they are relative to each other. And this one also did remain on the lighter side of things, which was also a little interesting to me, but yeah, lighter body in general. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think that it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, this one definitely did live up to the expectations I had for it going into it, as I do very much believe that Coffea Circulor will offer some of the better, cleaner, more vibrant natural processed Ethiopian coffees, as this one had a wide variety of fruit components to it, and it offered in a much more clean and we'll say defined sense as well. With that being said, for all the positives I do have to say about this coffee, it isn't necessarily my favorite natural processed Ethiopian coffee we have reviewed this year. I'm most distinctly thinking of that Karamo we had from Father's earlier. I think the main reason I liked that one more was because it might have skewed specifically in one direction, but it's that direction that a lot of us really enjoy about natural processed Ethiopian coffees, that of course being that blueberry sense. So this one offered maybe a little bit more depth to it. It was very nice in a lot of the fruit aspects. So there are a lot of huge positives I take away from this one. I feel like it's going to really struggle to finish as one of my favorite natural processed Ethiopian coffees, at least in terms of the top 10. It'll at the very least make an honorable mention category, but I think the only thing that really held it back was the fact that it just went a little bit more in a direction that isn't typically my biggest preference with natural processed coffees, that of course being those red berry aspects. Even if they were more clean and defined, it's going to be really hard for that to compete with something like the wash processed Ethiopia we had from Mood Trap, which offered a Panamanian geisha-like cup, as well as that Krama, which offered a very vintage natural processed blueberry Ethiopian-like coffee. So right off the top of my head, I can think that this is probably my third favorite Ethiopian coffee this year, but that's because it's against some really nice hard hitters. This one right here was still a tremendous coffee, at least, and definitely in terms of natural processed coffees. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to: if you do like your cleaner natural processed Ethiopian coffees, I feel like you'll enjoy it as much as I did, as it offered a lot of those things with great sweetness, tremendous sweetness. The sweetness was one of the most defining factors to it, complemented by all of the all of the fruit components that you're experiencing from it. All three, citrus, stone, and berry fruit, you're getting all of them in abundance in a very clean and defined manner. So there's a lot to enjoy from this one, and I think that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Duwancho NX Natural Processed Ethiopia from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.